the waiting room.
Okay, thanks, Doug. Alrighty, hello everybody. Good afternoon on behalf of all of us here behind the scenes today. Welcome to this event focused on the smart management of construction waste. This event was organized by Concordia University Center for Innovation in Construction and Infrastructure, Engineering and Management, Concordia's Next Generation Cities Institute, and hosted by us, Fourth Space. I'd like to signal a very special thank you to start to Assistant Professor in Building, Civil and Environmental Engineering, Rebecca Djedjik, for the tremendous work in making this happen. Thanks, Rebecca. For those of you unfamiliar with Concordia's Fourth Space, welcome to our virtual channel. We hope that you find yourself comfortable wherever you might be here today joining us. The space itself, Fourth Space, is located in downtown Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, on unceded Indigenous land, and it's a university-wide platform that connects the public with the inner workings of Concordia University by activating the various research projects, teachings, and cross-disciplinary initiatives brewing across the university. You'll see it as one of the screens here today, so feel free to poke a look around in the space itself. As you've already noted, we are running this session as a meeting instead of a webinar, since you will have the opportunity to actively participate in breakout rooms in the second half of this event. If you do have questions and comments during the first part of the event that you'd like everyone to see, because we've disabled the kind of private chat, please do use the chat for any comments throughout, and then you'll have an opportunity to participate fully in the breakout rooms and kind of question period. And I'll also note that we are recording and streaming the first part of this event, but the view is set to active speaker view for the recording, so audience members will not be visible. And on that note, it's my pleasure to pass it over to you, Rebecca. Welcome.
Thank you, Anna. Welcome, everyone. I'll move over to sharing my screen. And first of all, I'd like to thank all the participants for attending. This is the first of a series of events organized by the the Center for Innovation in Construction and Infrastructure Engineering and Management. And I'll just bring up here our main slides. So welcome, everyone. As I was saying, this is the first of a series of events. And I'm going to be your moderator today. I'm the assistant professor in the Building, Civil and Environmental Engineering department at Concordia. And this has been a group initiative, which you'll hear more about. Our agenda today starts with the welcoming remarks from myself, Dr. Mazzelli, which you will hear from, and Dr. Eicher. We'll then jump into a panel with industry experts and general discussion. And as Anna was saying, that's why we've chosen to go with a Zoom meeting format, so we can have more discussion. But it's been quite a success. There's a lot of people on the Zoom meeting. So if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat first, and we'll be curating those, and I'll call on you to make your question or your comment, and we'll organize it that way. Okay. At 5, we'll go into breakout rooms. There will be 3 breakout rooms on specific topics, and you can choose the topic based on your interests, and we'll have more interaction and specialized discussions. Finish everything off around 5:30 EST. Right?
J'ai pas de son, j'ai des images, j'ai pas de son.
And the event is being organized by the Center for Innovation in Construction and Infrastructure Engineering and Management. So I'll pass it on to Dr. Mazzelli to provide his welcoming remarks.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, and thank you for really the big effort that you've made in organizing and leading this workshop. I would like also to thank industry representatives and our faculty members who participated and contributed to this workshop and made it a reality. So I'd like to welcome all the participants this afternoon, and would like also to, in this occasion, to acknowledge the many contributions of our members of the Concordia Center for Innovation in Construction and Infrastructure Engineering and Management. So again, welcome you, and I hope that you will have a good, informative workshop this afternoon. I would like to pass on the microphone to my colleague, Dr. Ursula Eicher, the director of the institute to say a few words. Erica.
Thank you, Dr. Moselli, and for organizing this event with Rebecca and the whole team of the Center for Innovation in Construction and Infrastructure Engineering and Management. It's actually one of 14 research centers at Concordia that form the Next Generation Cities Institute, which we just founded in November last year. So this is actually the first major event that is happening in the framework, and we hope that many will follow, because we try to cover the whole diversity of research around cities. And of course, construction and infrastructure is a major focus in our research cluster on built in natural environments. But we also have a research cluster on mobile, secure, and information technology and design, arts, culture, and community, because we believe that cities can only thrive if we bring together the engineering aspects together with community building and the natural environments. So I'm very happy that this event takes place, and we are currently talking to industry and municipal partners to become members of the Institute, to collaborate with us on these various facets of sustainable and resilient city development. So thanks for organizing that, and I hope we have a very interesting discussion on this pretty important topic of waste, construction-based recycling today. Thank you, and Rebecca will moderate from now on.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Moselli and Dr. Eicher. Well, welcome everyone. Before we jump into the panel, we'd like to have a quick poll first to know if Douglas or Anna could put up the Zoom poll for us. You should see it on your screen. Sorry. What is your motivation for seeking smarter solutions for construction management? We'd like to learn from you. What has led you to join our workshop today? What are your interests? So you can answer on Zoom. We have about 30% of the vote so far. So if you're looking more at using this as a way to incur potential savings or reducing material use, or if you're more interested in reducing environmental impacts, these are all topics we'll be touching on today. Okay, I think I'll end the polling here, share the results with you. You'll see that most people reducing environmental impacts, also reducing material use. We're clearly a biased group that's interested in the environment and reducing our impacts. So with that in mind, we'll hear now from our panelists. We've invited 6 key experts in the area, and I know we have a wealth of knowledge not only in the panel but also in the audience. Thanks everyone that signed up for the event, and we want to hear your input in the discussion as well. We'll start off with the panel. Monsieur Nicolas Belrose is representing HECI Quebec. He's a research and planning officer at HECI Quebec for 10 years now, responsible to follow all the construction, demolition, recycling sector in the province. He won't be able to stay for the full workshop, but Francis Vermette, the operation director for HECI Quebec, will be here to continue that discussion. He has been the operations director at HECI Quebec since July 2018 and has managed all the programs and services that touch municipalities, organic, and construction demolition waste. Second, we have Dr. Abdurrahman Latfi, a regional manager of innovation and new products development at Lafarge Canada, Inc., and also an adjunct professor in the Department of Civil Engineering at Ryerson University, Canada. From BizBizShare, we should have Pierre Dagnon. You might, I'm looking at the list here, you might not be able to to join us, but if he does, he is the Chief Strategy Officer for BizBiz Global, an IT company from Quebec focused on business-to-business transactional solutions. From Dialogue, we have Stephanie Dallo, civil engineer and sustainability specialist. She has a master's degree in engineering leadership, focused on sustainable urban systems. You're also joined by Michelle Bouchard, the Vice President of Edific, a division of Devimco Immobilier, the real estate company in Quebec. And lastly, Dr. Ahmed Solomon, who's from the faculty at Concordia, is Associate Professor in the Department of Building, Civil, and Environmental Engineering. They'll each talk about their perspectives on what should a smart approach to construction waste management include. So to start things off, I'll pose that question to Nicholas. Okay, you can take over.
Yes, thank you, Rebecca. Hi, everyone. It's been a while since I did the presentation in English, so sorry if I hesitate a bit, but thank you for Concordia to give us this opportunity to talk a little bit about waste management from the construction sector. At Recyc Quebec, we have some vision to help the building manager or construction manager to help reduce the environmental impact that everyone talked, the majority talked earlier in the survey. So to help reduce the impact, we think that you have to plan to reuse what you have. When you have an existing building, the first reflex that people should have is look at the old building as maybe a mine for other material to reuse in the next step of the project. What you have to more I don't know if I can say it, deconstruct more than demolish the building that you have in front of you. You have to plan to avoid waste when you're planning the reconstruction. Maybe you can avoid waste by not putting some materials in some of the building, or when you plan the construction very to the fine details before you have to execute it, you can avoid get some waste when you are doing the building. After that, when you plan to use the best C&D sorting center, we have some kind of issue in the province that there is some C&D sorting that don't have a very good reputation. So at Recyc Quebec, we have implanted a new recognition program to help building manager or construction manager to get the best information to choose the better one in the industry. And finally, you have to choose your material wisely, because at the end of life of your building, if you put at the start some materials that are not recyclable, you have automatically going to landfill, or if there's some of the materials that don't have enough end markets, you're going to have a stockpile of some of the materials. So we have to think more like it's a buzzword right now, but a circular economy to help the materials who gets in, gets out, and being reused again or recycled. But for that, you have to choose wisely at the start.
Great, thank you, Nicholas. That was a really nice overview of some of the strategies and issues. And as you mentioned, Recyc Quebec is working on registering and setting up a list of the best C&D sorting centers. So maybe we can hear about that later, and people can also check the website for Recyc Quebec. There's a lot of information there. So before we go to questions and discussions, we'll go to the next panelist. And if you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat and we'll keep curating them. So next we have Dr. Abdul Lotfi from Lafarge.
Hello, everyone. I would like to share with you a little bit of overview from the private sector and the industry as one of the biggest producers of construction material globally. As we see more and more public and private sector sustainability initiatives, such as low to zero CO2 building materials requirement, CRD waste utilization becomes that much more critical. Updating the environmental and technical standards while establishing flexible yet realistic expectations to maximize the utilization of hundreds of thousands of CRD waste is very important, as we're running out of space to utilize these materials at our sites. There are a lot of positive experiences and safe applications to utilize these materials regionally and globally that we need to learn from it. There are clear differences in policies between different provincial levels and municipal levels that need to be addressed, that we see across the region. Some environmental specification and regulations, they're very restrictive. They treat CRD as residual materials, so you can't use it in most applications where we supply construction materials or concrete. I understand if it's close to a river or water source, but there's low risk applications where we can definitely utilize these materials. Also, we need to understand there's different types of these materials. Some are pure return materials from the manufacturer itself. Others are waste and contaminants. And some are recycled concrete aggregate that have some contamination of asphalts or other deleterious materials such as gypsum, glass, and asphalt. Smart sourcing of these material and segregation of it definitely is a key element to minimize the contaminations. And with minimizing the contaminations, we're definitely able to use more of these materials moving forward and be able to achieve some of these ambitious targets for low to zero CO2 building materials. Back to you, Rebecca.
Great, thank you, Dr. Lotfi. So now we've heard a little bit on the perspective on the material side. Unfortunately, looks like Pierre will not be able to join us. So I will pass it over to Stephanie Dallow from Dialogue.
Thanks, Rebecca. So I threw a lot on here because I wanted to talk about one way to address this being to consider or to incorporate circular design strategies and principles into current designs. I know that something that I'm dealing with on a day-to-day basis now is conducting life cycle assessments, looking at the embodied carbon in our projects. You know, we've seen a trend and improvements in the operational carbon, and now that focus is starting to shift to say, how can we reduce carbon in our materials? And you know, I deal with LEED, and many of you probably deal with LEED projects, and possibly even the Envision rating system as well for infrastructure type of projects that are not human occupied structures. But these not only have credits around construction and demolition waste management or reducing construction waste, but they have other credits around guiding the design team to carry out life cycle assessments and reduce embodied carbon or greenhouse gas emissions in your projects. And an area that I've wanted to focus on was really in the bottom table, the bottom left, is that beyond building life cycle, which is, you know, if we start to consider this in our LCAs, then that really, it really can have reduce the overall impact of the building. And so by not targeting or accounting for those activities, and what I'm seeing right now in our LCAs is that the databases that we use don't really consider that end of life. So we don't even really capture the benefits of reusing materials. So I've been looking at it like twofold. In one level, we're looking at reducing waste management now, but we don't have certain infrastructure in place. So while we're doing that, I'm suggesting, and I think many of us in the industry understand that we need to simultaneously improve the infrastructure and set certain change business models, train in industry to design for disassembly, to choose deconstruction over demolition, to consider buildings as material banks, and to use material passports and technology that can, such as RFID chips that can go on beams that track, the actual strength, and it's changing over time, but also if any maintenance is done, or how that could be, or how in the future it could be deconstructed. And that would allow the teams 50 years, 60 years, or even if we're thinking about resilient design and there is an environmental disaster or some sort of disaster to your building, can you go back and can you deconstruct and salvage some materials that can actually stay in that closed loop, and so that it could be reused. So, some things that we already mentioned was looking at materials and standardized materials that also have low contaminants, that have different types of connections that allow for disassembly. And so when we think about all of that together, there's just the benefits really overlap many things, because we're focusing right now in this conversation about construction and demolition waste management, but when you think of other credits, and I know we don't want to get rooted in thinking about points as why we do this, but it does, like for example for the Envision framework, there's other credits that encourage planning for sustainable communities, planning for long-term monitoring and maintenance, planning for end of life, and developing local skills and capabilities, such as designing for disassembly and deconstruction. So last thing I'll say is, I was really, and I was joking about wanting to choose more than one in the first survey we did, but I think it's important because I know that we all have this shared passion about reducing environmental impacts. But one thing I think is important that I'm trying to keep in mind is that business case and understanding what sectors and industries are stakeholders and benefit from this, and who would be the early adopters and who would be the followers. So just the things I wanted to put out there for later discussion. So and I forgot to include it in here, but I think it's worth mentioning the ISO standard 20887, which is the design for disassembly standard. So that's all. Pass back to you, Rebecca.
Great, thank you so much, Stephanie. So that was a great overview of the life cycle, and it's also showing us the relation between the different decision makers and the complexity in making these decisions and creating a more circular economy. Great, so I'll pass it on to Michelle Bouchard from DePimco.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'm far from being an expert into waste management. I mean, we are here builders. What we do is basically construct major downtown projects, and say residential towers, and this is our field. But I'd like to mention that all objectives that you pointed out at the beginning of the presentation, Rebecca, are all things that we would like to do in every of our projects. But unfortunately today, very little is done with respect to waste management in our field. And it's and as you probably all know, we're every decision taking into development and construction is driven by the returns on investment. So how do we increase waste management? How do we perform better waste management without increasing our costs? And this is a concern that we all have into our development fields. Every developer will say, I'm more than willing to participate in such programs, but how do I maintain my costs as low as possible without impacting the cost to the end users or to the buyers of our condominium units or residential apartments? I'd like to make a parallel with the LEED certification that you raised, Stephanie. In today's, LEED 10, 15 years ago was a concept that was not necessarily accepted by the developers until that the pressure came from the end users, the office building users and the retailers who said, listen, I'm willing to pay the additional or the incremental cost to be into a LEED building to cover basically the cost of building, the additional cost to build a LEED property. So once the market is ready to pay for these costs, I think it will definitely facilitate the integration of better waste management into my business. And that's something that as I said, I mean, everything is driven by the internal rate of return. If we can be able to manage or best manage our waste and without impacting too much returns on investment, I think our industry will definitely jumping into these avenues. So these are basically my comments on this topic.
Great, thank you, Michelle. Yeah, it's nice to point out the reality of the situation, that there are still barriers, and that's what we're all here trying to address and to meet as many of those initial goals as we can. Right? So last but not least, Dr. Solomon, over to you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ahmed Soliman, and I am assistant professor here at Concordia University. My area of expertise is related to green and sustainable construction material. We all are aware about the scarcity and depletion for natural resources, which is representing a huge challenge for the construction sector. In the meantime, considering the end of life of a structure or a product as the end of life for the used materials and time to send it to the landfill is also wasting for our resources. Therefore, we are in need for smart approaches. This highlights actually the waste management, and we know like many stakeholders start adopting different concepts. For example, we have the 3R, which recover, recycle, reuse. And recently we have also new R, which is reduce, as an attempt to reduce the potential waste coming out from different operations. Also, these smart approaches must follow the new regulations, bylaws enforced by different institutes, locally and international, just a way to show or to share the responsibility between the society, the company, the government. Here at Concordia and in our center, we try to design a number of smart approaches that can serve the current and future needs for sustainability. For example, we have the closed loop life cycle for material or infrastructure, where we try to reduce the amount of waste, targeting zero waste. We also adopt multi-generation waste, where you can use the waste more than one time. And for each time, you are going to monitor the change in the properties and feature for this waste, and how this will allow us to control downcycling and the upcycling for the final product and the waste. Also, we focus on valorizing different types of waste, not just to implement it in the new products or application. We focus on how we can utilize such waste to enhance the final product based on the properties for this waste. Also, as a response for environmental concerns, we implement a number of negative emission strategies from mimicking the nature, for example, in carbon sequestration methods. All these will add up to reduce the carbon footprint for the construction sector. We are open. We are eager to be part of our partner success. We are able to utilize our experience, our knowledge to get in or create new solutions, innovative solutions, evaluate the performance, also update and create new regulations and bylaws, spin the wheel to convert different types of wastes to a commercial and commercial product that will result in both society and economic benefits. Thank you. Back to you, Rebecca.
Great, thank you, Dr. Solomon. So now we've heard from all the panelists, and if you have any questions, please share them on the chat or comments. And now we'll focus on a few topics for the rest of the discussion. And to kick things off for the first one, focusing on designing and maintaining for disassembly and deconstruction, we have another poll. So in your, let me launch the second poll. In your experience, what are the 3 top barriers to designing and maintaining for disassembly and deconstruction? Is it a lack of expertise by the designers, the additional cost or perceived duration of design, difficulty in developing a business case, which is something that came up from Stephanie and from Devimco, from Michelle. A lack of lack of tools and analysis methodologies. Perhaps existing tools are not compliant with BIM, changing standards, lack of regulation, or other. And these 3 topics that we're going to dive into are also the 3 topics of the breakout rooms, which we'll have later. I'll end. Share the results here, and looks like for most people, the additional cost or duration of design is one of the biggest barriers right now. So I'd like to hear from Stephanie what her experience has been in that area. How are you dealing with some of these barriers, and then we can listen from others as well.
Sure, thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, I'm not surprised to see that one there. I think with anything, it's like a learning curve where at the start, you know, I did select that one, but I actually also selected like lack of expertise and changing industry standards, lack of regulation, because I think if we were to make that our industry standard, that we would actually perfect it, or it would just be like anything. Engineering is complex in its own way, right? So if we just incorporate it and we understand that this is important, when we understand our responsibilities as engineers, when it comes to resilience, to safety, you know, towards doing the best that we can with our project, then I think it will be kind of ingrained in the way we do things, and eventually it wouldn't necessarily be an additional cost. It would just be the cost of design. That's the way I look at it. I know that that's an optimistic way to look at it, but I actually see so many benefits when you think about like jobs that could come from this, like job creation from this. And really the cost that is there is the cost in labor hours, you know, which is, you can't ignore that. But if you think about the benefits from deconstruction versus demolition, I think it's a trade-off, and it's a good trade-off. So that's my take on it. I'm curious to know what the other panelists even think about that.
Yeah, thank you. Any of the other panelists would like to provide some insight on design for disassembly? I know within our group, at Concordia, we have Dr. Han, I think he's online, who specializes in modular construction. So maybe he could provide some insights as well.
Yeah, and I agree with what Stephanie said. I think there is a barrier, but it's also an opportunity to materials that was built in the past are better quality than the material that we use today. So the lifespan of those materials back in the days can still be used and not put in the trash to extend their lifespan. And now the biggest difficulty we have right now, it's our decision that we we are taking today for design building are going to have an impact like in 50 years when at the end of the building right now at that time. So right now we have to deal with some old buildings not necessarily designed to be deconstruct, to be to have the material reuse. But other regulation, like in Vancouver, they are very proactive on that front to with the city to like forced deconstruction for every building built before I think it's 1940 or 1950 to get those big wood beam to not put it in the trash or and get reuse at another level to get some new materials. And like we saw this year and last year that the price of wood's going up for new maybe now deconstruction and keep that kind of wood to be reused. Now the price tag is maybe going to be a little bit closer than it was before.
Yes, thank you. So clearly there are larger life cycle costs that might not be initially apparent, right? We are incurring additional costs, but we are gaining savings if we look at long-term costs, and if we look into externalities, environmental impacts, then it's even easier to make a business case. Maybe Michelle, since you mentioned return on investment, how do you find that we could better include some of these long-term savings in a business case?
It's always a question of let's say how's the market going to put pressure on you. This is how I see it. It has to come from either the end user or to make our industry react, or from government rulings. And unfortunately, we're stuck in the middle. We are basically buying land, demolishing sometimes properties, and I think in Quebec, we could be a little behind compared to other provinces with respect to regulations and requirements in terms of demolition. And again, these incremental costs will have to be factored in. They have to be, you have to be able to control these costs and make sure that it doesn't put you off market with respect to affordability or being able to offer your product to the end users. And this is a concern that we all have. It's a very competitive market. Construction and development is very competitive. And if you basically put yourself out of a competitive stance, then you won't be able to do your projects. It's a hard and at the same time disappointing perspective. But this is where we are until we get more regulations from the government and we're forced to do it. I don't think the industry will.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and for those of you that are looking at regulations such as Nicholas and others in the audience on that side, are there specific policies that you have found perhaps in Canada or in other countries that are doing more design for disassembly that have motivated those decisions?
Of what we see is more at a lower level of like municipalities or city more than provincial or for the big territory, because the market can change. For the province of Quebec, there is a whole different story when you are in Montreal, or if you are in a small city like Rimouski, or even farther like Sept-Îles or Rouyn-Noranda, to have a global provincial legislation wall to wall for every case. I don't think it's really it's going to be really useful. But I think on a more local level, this is where the regulation can be very useful. We are trying to work with municipalities to help them get the better information and to maybe implement that kind of regulation or bylaws to help with building permit, get the building permit faster when you're going to deconstruct the building before. These are some kind of strategy that can be used on a local level to help the waste management for the construction sector.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I think we touched on a question that came up in the chat. How can engineers influence political decisions? How could, let's say from the design side, influence some of this policy? I know Stephanie is on the CSE board, but maybe she can talk from your experience, how engineers can move that side.
Yeah, I think that one, sometimes it feels like it's tricky because to some people, especially, or maybe speaking for myself, like especially starting out in my career as an engineer, I felt really far removed from the governance and those decisions at the political level, which like influence policy. But that is kind of why I was interested in being involved with the Canadian Society for Civil Engineering, because that is a, you know, that professional association which connects you know, industry practitioners with academia, with governance. And I think by advocating, by kind of looking for continuous improvement and, you know, the best, you know, improving our standards, or I think that's how you influence policy. You know, the people who are working in academic, you know, both like practitioners and academics are working on city action plans. Those city action plans affect policy. So I think it's related, and sometimes it's a process and it takes time, but I think you need to keep the momentum. You need to remember that this is moving in a direction that is going to get us to where we want to go, but we need to kind of unlearn the way that we've done things, or understand that we used to do things differently based on what we knew then and what was going on then, but things are changing. So, excuse me. So yeah, I think that that's one way that you can as engineers be involved in affecting policy. And I think it's really great to connect with people in different jurisdictions, because you find policies, you find best practices in different jurisdictions, and you try to use that as your benchmark and say, okay, I understand that we're doing this here. Don't get me wrong, I understand sometimes it depends on your client and what their values and what they want to put money towards. But if you can encourage them and understand as consultants even that you are the ones who are almost expected to have this new information and this expertise, then you can influence the design decisions that are made. And if you use frameworks like LEED or Envision, you can take that approach or that angle of saying, okay, fine, this is not necessarily what's in our standards and this is not what's regulated, but this can be an innovation credit, and we can get recognized for doing this better and doing this differently. That's how I see it.
Thanks, that was very insightful. We have another question here, age-old question, and then I'll jump into the next poll. What would you consider the best construction material from a circular economy and life cycle assessment point of view? How does wood compare to concrete? I'll give that over to Dr. Solomon.
So like, it's not fair to compare like concrete and wood. From many points of view, like the properties for each one, the service life for the wood compared to the concrete, even also many aspects related to the way concrete is going to degrade compared to wood. But again, like if we would like to focus on or evaluate any material, we have to look for what we call it integrated material design, where you have to consider from day one getting the raw materials, implementing it in your structure, and then at the end of life use for this material. Concrete, we have different options for this one. Yeah, all the materials that we are using in the concrete, like cement, the aggregate itself, all these will add to the carbon emission. However, by the end, you can recycle this aggregate. The wood, on the other hand, during the life cycle, the wood itself will sequestrate carbon dioxide. But if we go to the end of life, we will have to pay the price for this wood. Okay, so as I said, like, it's unfair to compare the life cycle for each material. It will depend mainly on the way we design it and the way we are looking at for to serve in our community.
Thank you. So it really depends on the scope you've set, what location you're in. And since now we're discussing more recovered and recycled materials, our next poll is related to the barriers in that area. So for you, what are the 3 top barriers to using recovered and recycled materials? Is it a lack of information about them, a lack of standardization, unknown impacts on building performance, perhaps risk, the aesthetic, the preference for new materials? And you can choose up to 3. Give you some time there. And I know in the audience we have Gilles Bernardin from 3RMCDQ, which is a group in Quebec for recovering and recycling materials. Gilles, if you'd like to comment on some of these barriers, I'd like to hear from you.
Yes, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. There's one barrier there that I think should be included, which is whenever construction material comes out from a construction site, under Quebec regulation, it's a waste. And accordingly, you have to deal with it as a waste. If you send this material to a construction and demolition recycling center to process this material into a usable material, take for instance asphalt shingles, and you want to use asphalt shingles into asphalt pavement so that you can recycle the asphalt content in the shingles, well, the material coming from the C&D site to the asphalt plant is still a waste. And the Ministry of the Environment is requiring the asphalt plant to get an approval to use the material in its process. At the 3RMCDQ, we've been at it for 8 years to get the process of getting an asphalt plant permitted to use asphalt shingles, something that has been used for 10 years in the States, and we're still on the starting line with this.
And so what are some of the strategies that you're using? I know you've been a lot of engagement and reports with your members.
Well, as I said, when those shingles, in account of the shingles, the way they were produced up until 2010, they were made of felt with about 30% asphalt content. Now those are not manufactured anymore, so that probably in 2025, 2028, there won't remain any felt asphalt shingles on roof. And the new shingles are manufactured out of fiberglass, and instead of having 30% asphalt content, it's only 15%. Currently, the shingles with the felt shingles are used as alternative fuel in a cement kiln. When they shred the shingles, the screening off the minus 3/16 particle size, that was used in asphalt plant, until somebody from the ministry went to the site where the shingles were processed and say, You're sending a waste to a site that is not allowed to use it. And that's how we had to deal with the ministry to do a stack sampling program to show that introduction of the shingles into the process does not impair the quality of the emission. We've been at it for 5 years to try to get a plan to do this without much success. While we were trying to get a plan to do this, the Ministry of the Environment issued permits to landfill to use those shingles as daily cover material. In doing that, those shingles, when they're used for this application, the redevance of $23 is not applicable. So when we were told that now landfills can use this, we said, thank you very much. We already didn't have any asphalt plant that was ready to do the testing that you require, but now you have removed $23 from the economics of recycling the shingles into the pavement. Thanks God, we had finally one asphalt plant that raises then and it says, yes, we're ready to move ahead. We had the stack sampling program fully subsidized by Recyc Québec. The results were conclusive. The day that the ministry was about to say, yes, we can do it, somebody said, now the asphalt, the regulation dealing with asphalt plant needs to be revised. So now we're still on the starting line, waiting for this whole thing to move ahead. Mm-hmm. Now, as much as you listen to this, you say, why, not an easy job. And please understand one thing, the end market for the shingles are not the asphalt plant. It is the Ministry of Transport and cities, because if they do not require or do not want to have recycled shingles in their road, nothing is going to be done.
Yeah, thank you for the story, the example. And I think Dr. Abdullatfi wanted to add to that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Rebecca. So again, there's two key factors that we see as a material suppliers that is restricting the expansion of utilizing waste materials, basically, in construction and construction material like concrete. Number one is the technical standards that is available and the variability of these technical standards across the different provinces. So we see a big difference between Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic Canada in terms of what we can and cannot do with the same products. The second aspect is the environmental regulations and the specifications. At the end of the day, we all have the same goals. Some of the colleagues have touched on cost and limitations. I think at the end of the day, depending on what you're offering, in a lot of cases, actually, there's not cost associated with the final product like concrete. If anything, actually, there's CO2 reduction, there is environmental impact that is positive, like improved APD or LEED certification that you're able to attain by using materials like this. But going back to the restrictions, we see a big difference between provinces like Ontario and what they're allowed to do and what, in Quebec, they allow us to do. We see also, limitations in terms of usage and applications. You look at City of Montreal, they are one of our biggest customers. We're able to utilize recycled concrete aggregate in sub-base applications. You go a little bit out of Montreal and the story changes. Municipalities have different regulations, different allowances for the same exact material. The goal is one, but since it's not mandated from the provincial point of view, it becomes really everyone a point of view and lack of understanding and taking the risk, which limits the applications. Going back to MTQ, for instance, they're allowed from environmental point of view to demolish and reuse the products as long as they keep it on site. The same product that we will collect and screen for, we're not able to use it. So almost there's two different sets of standards, and there's ways that you can utilize it and break it and use it on site. But as soon as it moves from the site to an external site, then it's treated as, Gail's mentioned, is treated as residual material or waste material. And you have to treat it as such. and it becomes very restrictive and you can't use it. Another example I can give you, which CSA allows us to utilize it that way, and provincial specification in Ontario allows you to use virgin aggregate and blend it with recycled aggregate and end up with a product that you're able to use at the end of the day that meets the specification. The same token cannot be applied in Quebec. As soon as you introduce to a virgin aggregate stockpile even 1-2% recycled concrete aggregate, it doesn't become virgin aggregate anymore. It becomes waste. Even though it's just 1%, it becomes waste. So I think that the standards and the specifications need to be updated differently. There's area of improvement. It needs to be consistent with what has been done in different provincial standards and also global standards. So I think we're taking a little bit of a step back on that, and I'm happy to be part of that, to see that we are leading changes. We're discussing strategies and changes to specifications and regulations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very interesting, and showing that the topic that's coming up again and again is creation of standards and how regulations can motivate certain decisions one way or the other. And that leads us somewhat into our last poll. So for you, what are the 3 top barriers to closing the cycle, to recovery and recycling materials? What is missing to close that cycle, to move material from the end of its so-called life in a building or facility or infrastructure, and for it to be recovered or recycled? Is it the lack of markets, an information exchange system? Is it adding increased transportation, storage? It's not cost effective. Again, you can choose up to 3. So here we've heard a little bit about the perspective from Ontario, from Quebec. I know Dr. Hamid Al-Zaman from the city of Edmonton is here. I don't know, I can't see if your camera is on or not, but if you'd like to share your perspective from the city of Edmonton, what you've been experiencing. Maybe we lost him. Okay. Well, I'll end the poll here, and we can check the results. So we have most people choosing a lack of cost-effective material separation methods, which is interesting. So on the end of the life cycle, there is an increase in added costs for separation, for actually decoupling certain materials and allowing that to be recovered or recycled. So on this side, maybe Dr. Solomon can talk about some of these barriers, and then we'll move into the breakout rooms.
Okay, thank you, Erica. Yeah, actually, we can say that the 3 questions that you posted are all connected with each other. Okay, if we go for this one barrier about recovery, and we said the lack of information, and this one of the main points that even Stephanie talked about at the beginning, lack of information about what will be the performance of this raw material or waste material after we get it back. And this will link us to, we can't find now, if you go and we would like to get specification, you can find CV analysis for the aggregate and so on. However, if you go for the raw or waste material, we don't have this. And if we try to do it, and even if we have the same CV analysis, which is acceptable for new material, this come up that this material is not pure, it's contaminated, it's a mix from different types of wastes. So we have to think about it in a different way. Nowadays, we have what we call it performance-based design, where we have to think about our waste, what will be the application that we can implement it. Okay, so based on that, we can downcycle the material to new application, which will fit the service life that we are looking for. Okay, so again, like I just would like to share with you one thing. Like we have a project before, and we used the recycled aggregate, and we started adding as a portion from the new aggregate. And even with achieving the required performance, the owner still no, like I don't want to increase it like that. Like, can we go back to the regular one? Why? Because he don't have any data or any information about the surface life for this material. After you use the recycled, yeah, how long it's going to survive? Is it going to survive for the 50 years, which we are looking for, or it's going to just cut the life cycle to half, and so on. Okay, so as I said, like all the questions build over each other, and the key point will be here, that lack of information. We don't have enough information about the performance of this recycled material. And by the way, we are contributing to that by not allowing the use of recycled material. Regulations that stop us from using this recycled material, hiding us, making like put everything on hold. Okay, yes, we are saying, okay, we would like to be green, we would like to reduce carbon emission, but you are not allowed to recycle the material. And this will be one of the many challenges that we are facing nowadays. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great point. Sorry to cut you off, Stephanie. We're going to go into the breakout rooms, and we'll have more discussion. But to close off this part of the event, I'd like to thank all the panelists and everyone that joined and added questions and comments. And we weren't able to go through all of them, but we will save them, and maybe we can address them in the breakout rooms. And the point that Dr. Solomon just made was quite insightful, that these questions and these topics are all related, and we've seen that there are multiple barriers, and probably there's no one solution, right? You've heard different solutions from different perspectives. It's a multi-pronged approach on how we can move into a smarter management of construction, renovation, and demolition materials, not to use the terminology waste. Okay? So keeping on these main topics, we're going to have 3 breakout rooms now. First, I think Doug will open them in a second. Number 1 on design, maintenance, rehabilitation, and deconstruction. So if you are interested in that topic, Dr. Mazzelli, Dr. Nickback, and Dr. Hamad, and Dr. Han, all professors from our group will be there.
We then talked about very interesting issue of project delivery methods, construction project delivery methods that are better compliant with performance-based design rather than the prescriptive-based design. We talked about the important role of off-site and modular construction. And we said that components that are manufactured in factory, shipped to the site, installed to the site, are at the end of the life cycle easier to be dismantled, basically disassembled and shipped elsewhere and be reused. We also talked about the traceability of these components when they become part of the facility, particularly for complex facilities, knowing what is where. And Internet of Things, IoT technologies, and also technologies such as RFID were discussed, and the other types of barcodes were discussed to know what is where, and hopefully collecting data on the life cycle to understand the exposure of these components, the load cycles that they underwent, to know at the end of life cycle what is the residual life of them and in what condition they are. At the end of the day, the deconstruction technology would be also another important area if you want to basically extract components at a good level of health that can be reused elsewhere, repurposed and reused elsewhere.
Thank you, Dr. Nickbat. Back to you, Rebecca. And I would like, if toward the end, if you could allow for a minute or two, I would like maybe to speak to the participant at large with one question: where do we go from here? So if you would allow me toward the end of the workshop to share that question with them.
Of course. So from the second room, Dr. Solomon, what were your key points?
Yes, we start talking about like mainly what are the barriers for recycle and reuse at the material level, and what are the thoughts about changing the name for this recycled material. This may attract the people to use it. And I was surprised by Dr. Lotfi mentioned that they started even, applying the same by changing the name. Also about the cost for this material and how it's relative to the natural material that we can use it. And we end up by very funny, but it ended up to be like a reality. When we talk with Dr. Lotfi about, okay, we can go or take the waste from Quebec, send it to Ontario, where they allow using this type of waste. And he confirmed that they are doing that exactly in Ottawa, the same. Okay, so I asked him, like, the Ontario can charge Quebec and get the money from them by like recycling the aggregate. And so that's like, it seems like, as I said, like as a final conclusion, the regulations are hiding us from doing our job. We don't have enough information, okay? And again, our concept ourselves, okay, to accept using recycled material or use the material is still a big challenge. So maybe later on, if we change it from recycled aggregate to Agro Pro 1 or +1, as Dr. Lotfi mentioned, maybe like we will find many people using the recycled aggregate. Thank you.
Interesting. So lastly, Dr. Ziri, from the more policy environmental side.
Thank you very much. We had a brief discussions, and I guess on the policy and strategy side, it probably needs one whole, panel of discussions, and from the brief exchange of ideas, we recognize, that there are, two issues. One with respect to metrics and how to quantify basically environmental impact, concrete versus wood versus metals, and it depends, in which way you're doing the assessment. Is it per kilogram over service life? Is it for a specific building? So a building made all of wood or made all of concrete, that makes a difference in terms of interpreting the emissions and energy intensity. And beside the metrics, there is also the variation in terms of potential. So there are the ones that has existing potentials for recovery in the construction sector itself, when we think about concrete, cement, but there are also materials that probably has to be linked to other sectors, especially metals, when we talk about aluminiums or other precious metals, which are energy intensive and emission intensive, but use of them goes beyond construction sector. And the policy is there to guide in terms of these metrics, what materials, what are the basis of our assessment, and what are the potentials. So these are kind of things that could create a kind of a well-deserved link between the supply side of recycled materials and the end users of them.
Mm-hmm. Right, interesting. So from all three rooms, there's been various opportunities identified, and I think we've only scratched the surface today. It was a short event, and we wanted to start it that way so you're not tired on Zoom, but it is the first of a series, and we want to hear from you, your feedback, and how we can improve it and make it more useful. There's definitely room for us to discuss each one of these topics in much more detail. So I'll leave it to Dr. Mazzelli to pose this question.
Can I take 5 seconds before wrapping up? Let me say apologies. For those who are attending CSC conference, I just wanted to mention that one important deconstruction project that is going on right now in Montreal is the Champlain Bridge, the old Champlain Bridge. One of the keynotes of the Construction Specialty Conference is on the details of deconstruction of that project. I just wanted to invite everybody who's attending that conference to not to miss that keynote. Thank you. Sorry, I missed it.
Sure.
Well, thank you very much, Rebecca. Number one, for really organizing, leading, and making sure that we have that, I would say, important workshop. I'd like to thank the panelists for their contributions in the workshop today. And I would like to ask the questions really, and also all the participants, because without participants, we do not have a workshop. So I do thank you all for making this workshop what it is today. We clearly have touched on a number of critical issues related to smart way of managing construction waste. And the question here to all of you on two things. On the organization, should we have left, if you think and you give us a feedback, we will highly appreciate it. Of course, that all will go to Rebecca. Whether we should increase the time for the breakout rooms and have more, even in the panel. I just wanted to hear from all of you. We all wanted, because we at the center at CCM, we would really want to reach out. We wanted to make a real value in such a major issues like that. And with it, we cannot do it alone. So I wanted your feedback. If we're to hold another or organize another workshop, the distribution of time, and would you like to have the questions ahead of the workshop? And having said that, we really at the center for really aim for two things: outreach, and wanted to reach the community, the design professionals, the construction companies, and the public at large. And the second part is we wanted really to encourage collaborative industry research collaboration. We've seen, for example, the work of Dr. Maybe the time did not permit, Dr. Solomon is leading on an international level the decarbonization, if I said it right, Dr. Solomon, correct me, of concrete. And we wanted to know the added cost of that, or no added cost value. So we wanted partnering. We wanted to establish that. And also for those who attended from industry today, we would welcome you as a member of the center, should you wish to be a member, and then we will forward to you publications in related areas or in general. It all depends what you wanted to see. You have access to our webpage and our publications. With that, I will stop here and thank you all for participating in this workshop. Back to you, Rebecca, and I thank you very much for leading this workshop for us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moselli, and thanks everyone who participated, all the panelists in the discussion. It was very interesting. We did send out slides before with more information on the center and each professor, but we will also follow up our group and Fourth Space seeking feedback on the event and providing more information on what we see are some of the priority areas, and hopefully that can lead to further events and more collaboration. Well, thank you, and Anna, I'll let you finish things up.
Thanks, Rebecca. I won't say much more than just simply thank you for coming together in this way. And as you do suggest, I will follow up with everybody who registered and who participated. Those who didn't make it in here today will have access to the recording, and then we'll share a survey with those folks asking how they'd like to proceed and what their suggestions might be. So on that note, I wish you all a very fine Thursday evening, and perhaps for some of you, the start of a long weekend. And we will see you again in June, hopefully. Thanks very much, everybody, and have a great night. Bye.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.